several years in Fosters and Partners in London, and most recently MIT Media Labs. So thank you so much, George, for joining us on stage, and very excited. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. It's really great to be presenting in this immersive space that you've created, and it's great to see some images and everything, everything you've laid out so nicely. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. Today I will be talking about creative applications of AI in architecture. This is going to include some of my recent work, in particular my recent thesis, Harvard Graduate School of Design, called Multimodal Architecture. And this really revisits the role of language within design practices, use of multimodal machine learning models. So then after this talk, we can be like 15, 20 minutes, we can then roam around space and answer some questions and show you some other projects and workflows. Maybe just to start, just a few words about myself. And like many of you, I also come from an traditional educational background. And in the past few years, I've become increasingly interested in this middle ground between computation, technology, machine learning, and these traditional practices. So it's really with this exponential rate of development of machine learning that now, maybe more than ever, it's even a fun place to be, that we're more and more this middle man or this middle woman bridge these two worlds within architecture. So where the access and knowledge of machine learning really brings a new disciplinary approach through innovation. So Crossley and collaborators really blending the physical, in this case, with the digital. Through augmented machine learning and interactive web platforms. This really was a springboard for me to ask these two questions. The first being, how will these new tools design affect the culture of architecture production, and how can we use AI collaboratively to augment the creative process? So often when we talk about AI, we talk about AI really replacing the role of the architect. So today we will cover several of these tools which really demonstrate how this technology is rather augmenting toolkit that architects use within the creative design process, designing buildings or environments. So Andy Clark and David Chalmers describe how we can expand what our brain, therefore creative process, are capable of doing with external resources. So this expansion of our cognitive creative process with these external resources can really begin merging as one. So therefore, what will and should increasingly emerge as a creative process should be defined by a constant feedback loop of innovation, where the designer and the AI really act as collaborators in building the data, feeding the AI models, generating outputs, most importantly through this act of curation, which I think is really important, especially what we're seeing with all these models we're using today, create this design. So this intuition, this curation. So in the art world, this has already caused a huge stir regarding the two main topics of authorship and creativity. So even this process can be seen as having a feedback loop. So the question really arises in asking, who remains the creative author? This goes from the early examples, like in this case, 2018, which was auctioned for something like $500,000 or something at Sotheby's, to where we are today using DALL-E or Midjourney, generating incredible resolution models. So mainly, for time's sake, I'll mainly be covering two models which focus on this idea of collaboration. The first one is called placemaking AI. project I did in collaboration with Dong-Young Kim almost 2 years ago. And it was really used as a tool, bridged citizens and designers with urban and city stakeholders through the use of machine learning. Just play a brief video. So as our cities grow, as they constantly develop, we are in need to create more sustainable, green, and walkable streets. So can AI help us imagine and visualize these? So through the collection of a data set of about 600 images of these kind of idealized street scenarios, we divided them into those with amenities, green spaces, or pedestrian streets. We're really avoiding the congested, busy, affluent. We tested these in Cambridge and compiled them within what's very important is an accessible user interface. So with this user interface, could we use different machine learning models to frame views, but equally done with Google Maps street views to generate different and more walkable, more pedestrian-friendly streets. This was done in earlier moments, so CycleGAN in this case, less effective. This is actually pix-to-pix. So by if you can already see these early examples in which from a Rhino model or from a congestion non-ideal street can begin empowering normal people the same way DALI or the same way tools are doing today. Really a prompt, in this case a user interface or text. How can we reimagine these streets or these spaces? You can already see how fast machine learning has developed in such a short period of time, and it really blows my mind every time we get to see different models or different interfaces being made. And this really brings me to this design. I believe will really change the role play an integral role within design in the coming years in light of these recent multimodal developments in machine learning. So for most of the 20th century, architects have really been in denial that language has had any significance. There was this enormous emphasis on buildings and drawings being the medium of the architect. Architects like me is famously saying, build, don't talk. So Adrian Forty really describes how modern develops deep suspicion of all the visual arts, stating that the general expectation of modernism is that each art then demonstrates its uniqueness through its own medium, and its own medium alone. So this presented an interesting duality where on one side there's this denial of language, yet on the other there's this complete reliance on it through conversation, discussion, written text about architecture. It's interesting to see how in the architectural context or the design context, the brief really acts as the first and most important verbal prompt of the design, leaving this open interpretation for architects to iterate across different modes of representation, design solutions. So with the recent developments of machine learning, in particular these text-to-image models, project repositions language as a central mode of representation and apprehension of architecture in this multimodal process. So we've reached we've actually reached an unprecedented verge between text and image processing. which really challenges this idea of authorship agency and places frameworks of these talks like we're having today being critical in the future discourse. So these new tools really present, I think, opportunities in establishing new collaborative design methodologies. So what this convergence means is that we go from models like StyleGAN, or image-based, and models such as GPT-3, which is completely text-based, have a single prompt, and it generates an output. Into merging these into multimodal machine learning models, Blimp and VQGAN, what's commonly used today is DALL-E 2, Midjourney, which can really be used together to generate images for now, right? Develop into more simply based on a text prompt. So let's look at, I guess, how this could be applied within the architectural context in an early design stage. So this all really begins with a brief and a site, as explained, and I began by selecting my hometown in Rome, the Flaminio neighborhood. So here, the Maxi Museum, for those who might know, they offered this international competition to extend the museum. So it's a site between the Maxi and the Palazzo Nervi. And the competition brief describes the center of experimentation related to artificial intelligence, creativity, and art. The center dedicated to the conservation and restoration blue educational spaces offered by the Maxi in green and other spaces. So with the written brief on the left, which is right here, what emerges is a new design framework, and you can see these. You can see like an extended framework, which is on the other side. There's an image explaining it as well, if you want to also go look at it later. So really, it goes between intuition, which is at the bottom, so the architect, and the machine, so this machine learning algorithms. And in this methodology, the first step is really this interpretation of the text in this writing of architecture. So this step is followed by actually designing the external formal qualities of a new space. On one side, we have this agency to calibrate the use of these tools. On the other, we become full curators in the selection, defining of each image. So there's these dials. So let's walk through this process, which is, let's say, become much more common. And in this case, it's a research building prompt. So while this result is maybe more uncanny, and it's a result that was nowhere near possible when I first started the research over a year ago. And through the addition of architectural styles emerges an abstract sense of materiality in form, can be iterated and hybridized in different styles by adding realistic representational prompts, hyper-realistic 4K. Many of you will know these words are really important because of the data set. We're improving these through words like trending on ArtStation. The last step is adding more of a conceptual dimension, which I think is important, maintaining this agency. So, say a moment of rupture between modern and Roman architecture. So it's this act of curation and calibration between abstraction and what I'm calling the semantic specificity required to generate the text, really generates architecture. And it creates, we've all seen, quite uncanny but wildly suggestive image prompts indicating this rupture, as you might see in some of the images in this spatial model they've been created. So this process continues from exterior to interior conditions through controlled agency and curation, beginning from moments of arrival to entry moments, laboratory spaces, to research collaborative spaces here or storage rooms, and to really like tie these all together. What's important, with at least within this architectural context, is an internal logic. It's still imperfect, generating plans, not a typical data set, which is even though DALL-E is more successful in this. So we can, with this generation of plans, we can have that internal logic, which will then inform assembly logic. So each of these plans can really be spatialized and interpolated between one another. And it's through this also map reconstruction, each text red line sketch can actually materialize into a volume, establishing a set of spatial relations open for interpretation. So this notion, it's quite interesting, of a picture being worth 1,000 words no longer stands in isolation. As a word or set of words, now worth 1,000 pictures or even forms coming years. So these reconstructions can really be turned into hybridized interior and exterior forms, textures, and provide new spatial metrics to help refine these inputs, image relations. So to test these assumptions, I selected a series of 3D qualities and spatial forms. And what emerged is really an interplay between my own understanding of the brief, volume, height, and this interpretation, this negotiation with the machine learning model, creating these forms. So the intention wasn't to propose a fully resolved project, but a glimpse into new framework of design, which can help inform current intuitive or generative processes. So ultimately, architecture is not just the building, also discourse or the process defines these. The representation or even this mediation of form, which is essential. And so this is, with this new design framework, text and verbal speech find new relevance as the key medium of design, directly implying materiality and form. So what really emerges is this visual and textual interplay between humans and machines, iteratively as collaborators. Ultimately, what remains is the textual writing of architecture. And as Alan Turing wrote, it's only the foretaste of what to come, and only a shadow of what is going to be. Now, that's it for the presentation side of things. Before taking some questions, we're gonna explore. We're gonna walk around the space, and I'm just gonna show some of this process and how it's expanded recently. So maybe, I'm not sure how it works, but for the processing part, we should know how to do that. So we're gonna go up to the space and spend maybe 5 minutes walking, explaining some of the models. If you follow me to the high, kind of got my camera on now, so maybe you see me a bit better. But you can see, I guess, it all begins with the text, and these are some images which outcome from the process. What's interesting, these are on the right are some early models. Begin navigating the space, generate different outputs. Those were done almost a year ago, so it's we've come quite a far away in developing the models. So right behind me, you see this creation of form. You can kind of see this. I'm going to just scale it up. Manage to do this. Scale. Okay. So you can see process that one of the processes that I was interested in is really extracting that pixel dimension, that pixel meaning of that image. So from image to depth map, from that depth map, we can then begin exploring that and generating hybrids either with Houdini or interpreting between one image and another or one form and another. So you start getting these like interesting middle grounds, which on the other side, on the far right, you can see how that can either be one side interpreted as it is. You take the form from the image and you just move to the other side. You take this form and you begin modeling it, sculpting it, interpreting through it as you would in the normal creative process. Or right next to me, I've moved once again with the white t-shirt. There's more of a computational generative process where if you come closer, and I'll scale this as well. You can kind of see like the model right here that I'm right next to. You come above it, you can see that it's a plan. It's an extruded plan. From that plan, we can begin creating different forms, different geometries, using Grasshopper, Houdini, or different computational processes. That was what in the last digital futures, which we called generative metaverse. You see where I'm looking here above, kind of like one summary page. We went through many days of teaching students from text to image, more machine learning, code side, as well as getting into Grasshopper. And the final day was the idea we are compiling now all the models to mint all of their models into, let's say, the course metaverse. So you can see how some generative processes create these like new hybrids, and it really shows you. We had interesting conversations about scale, about what it means to be designed in digital space, and you can see a real opportunity in using machine learning or generative tools in this space. That's also an ongoing study, and I think I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll take any questions. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Hey, George, this was amazing to see you present here and take us on this tour of your amazing work. You know, nothing better than presenting 3D GANs than in 3D, right? One thing that I would like to comment on and ask a question is earlier in the presentation, you mentioned how there's a lot of conversation about these tools being a replacement for architects. And your position is in the lines of what Andy Clark and Charles said about the idea of extended mind, right? And I personally have looked at the research a lot, and I understand the idea of the extended mind. For those that don't know, you know, it's the kind of the potential of external tools outside of our brain be used as an extension of cognition. Same way that, you know, if you use your notes app on your phone to write down something so you don't forget is an extension of memory. That's more or less what they write about. And you talk about how this can be an extension of the architect. And I would like to know your opinion about moving forward, this new generation of even architecture students that they have exposure to these tools, how important it is to learn how to communicate with these machines as training for design, architecture, creativity itself. And I'd like to know your opinion about it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think maybe a good place to start is a quote saying with I think it's Marshall McLuhan or something. He quoted saying, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. I think that's really visible these days, and it'll become more more and more visible, I think, first within the art world, and then will gradually permeate in architecture, using DALI and how that might inform a certain aesthetic process. But I think it's these tools and systems which really enable different or a new type of creativity. So what's interesting to see these days is, I was reading the other day, it's the idea of how with machine learning we're democratizing this idea of creativity. So speeding up, in a sense, this apprehension or this, how long it takes you to learn, to go from like beginner to expert. And so I think this like duality between what the models, the machine is giving you, negotiating that through a feedback loop. I think it's this whole process which is really interesting and excited about.
Awesome. Thank you. And the floor is open if anyone has any questions to bring them forward.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, I have a question because I heard a really interesting word when you were about this human-machine interaction, and you called it a negotiation, right? With the actual model, and I think that's the first time I hear that word used in the context of a tool machine, which is pretty interesting, right? And I would like you to elaborate on that, like on that collaboration or negotiation concept between humans and in this case, these deep learning algorithms.
Well, I'm sorry, I missed the word. Did you say initiation?
Negotiation. That's the word
Oh,
you use. Negotiation.
yeah, I think it's an interesting. There's always a balance between collaboration and negotiation. I think it's always this. There is a fine line in understanding one's agency and how we're given over in a sense. I think I do believe architect will remain as in a central place to have control over the process. So I think it is a fine line between, it is at times, at least with models that are emerging, these newer models, it can be at times a negotiation. Maybe an example of that is constraint, for example, of a data set. Most of these data sets are things that many users aren't aware of. Cultural biases which go behind them might at times go unnoticed or people might not be aware of them. I think it's important, even within this process, to have control, move it from negotiation to active collaboration or control process. Within that example, it's generating your own data set, being cognizant of the whole machine learning process. I hope that answers some of the question.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, I have one more question. So basically, if you consider these language models as translators from one language to another, the other one being images or a combination of pixels that makes something understandable, we have to consider that there are always, this trial and error as well as translation errors within that process. Even when you generate an image and it's analyzing the perspective in order to create a height map. whenever it fails to convert something that would be a hallway into a flat panel, or it fails to understand that that would be glass into another space and makes a solid wall, those translations in a way convert into actual space. I wanted to understand your position in a way. What is our role in interpreting those things, almost like sketches, versus the generation of those spaces based on errors, or if the error is actually part of the process in creating something new? I wanted to get your perspective on this idea of the errors in translation.
Yeah, super interesting question. I think there's this constant goal for us to improve the models or get higher resolution and eventually get to maybe 3D form. But I do really value what you're describing, this mistranslation or these errors which occur. And I mean, there's been so many papers and so much progress on machine learning today, especially within the processing side, relies often on this idea of interpretation of or what this image could generate or what forms could come of it. So I think it presents an interesting opportunity, and I hope you've seen this this conversation that I've been having in interpreting the image through intuition, but also through computational means to really try to create different form. But I see it more as an opportunity, a limitation. In the next few years, we're just gonna get like more and more like high quality resolution, giving maybe less space to errors.
Awesome. And do you think this increase in resolution, it means a decrease in creativity in that sense?
I think with each tool will come new modes of representation, of creation. So I think it will be a constant development as we've seen through history. But I think there will always be errors in some way. It might be harder to find.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So if there are no more questions, I would like to thank George for the amazing presentation, for sharing his time. He's in Italy right now, guys, so like it's really late out here. So I really thank you so much for being here with us. This was amazing. The stuff that you brought here, the conversation we had, and I can't wait to see more, honestly. And just letting you guys know, if you guys are interested in this topic as well, we are going to be, we just learned actually, we're both going to be on Digital Futures this weekend, talking about the space of metaverse and architecture. So you guys are more than welcome to join the conversation, and as well as the future dive live. So next week we're going to have Carlos Navarro on stage presenting his work as well. And I think you, George, you guys interacted before, right? You and Carlos?
Yeah, we know each other. He's also been in an old workshop exploring similar topics, but it's great to have seen his progress and his last Digital Futures, which was super exciting.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you guys are interested, he's going to be here next week, as well as on the 17th, Neil Leach is going to be here. And then on the 24th, Ahmed. And then on the 31st, we're going to have the gallery. So if you do experiment with, Midjourney or any other tools of artificial intelligence in the field of creativity, make sure to submit your submissions to be part of this gallery. So thank you so much, George. This was a treat. And I'll catch you later on.
Thanks so much. Thanks for organizing this.
And feel free to hit the like button on the space. You know, you don't ask much. Thank you. And yeah, if you took a video or something, make sure to tag us and George on social media, and we'll see you guys on Discord. Bye, everyone. Have a good night.